Okay.
Are we being broadcast?
Are we being broadcast yet? Okay, I'll open the meeting then. This is the Planning Commission meeting of August 19th, 2019. May I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Berman.
Present.
Commissioner Campbell.
Here.
Commissioner Clifford.
Present.
Commissioner Niblin.
Here.
Commissioner Kraske.
Here.
Commissioner Big Stick.
Present.
Stina is absent.
Okay. Looking for a salute to the flag, and I think I'll do that tonight. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. The next order of a business would be the approval of the order of agenda. Commissioner Big Stick,
I move we approve the order of agenda.
Commissioner Niblin.
Second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Please vote. And that passes unanimously. On to approval of the minutes. Commissioner Niblin?
Yes, I'll move approval of the minutes for the meeting of July 15th, 2019.
Okay, and one moment, I do want to make one minor correction in the minutes. And that is on packet page 17, all the way down at the bottom. And we have two that's in a row in that last sentence. If we could take one of those out, that would be nice.
Sure. Well, subject to that correction, I'll continue with my motion.
Okay, and Commissioner Berman?
I second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Please vote. And that passes unanimously. Now moving on to a delegation of a liaison for the City Council meeting of September 9th, 2019. And that's going to be for Lot 37, Salata Ave Appeal. Anybody interested in taking that up? I'm not seeing anybody jumping on that. Oh, Commissioner Niblin, thank you.
Yeah, I'll attend.
Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate that. All right, on to oral communications. This portion of the agenda is available to the public to address the Planning Commission on any issue within the subject matter jurisdiction of the commission that is not on the agenda. The time allowed for any speaker will be 3 minutes. I don't have any cards up here. Is there anybody that wishes to speak to the commission on anything that is not on tonight's agenda? Seeing no one, I'm going to close the public hearing and move on. We have no consent items. We do have a continued public hearing, which is rent increase application RIA 2-18 to increase the rent at the Marymount Gateway Apartment Complex to the current market rate. May I have a staff report, please?
Chair and members of the Commission, on June 3rd, the Planning Commission held a public hearing on the rent increase request for the Marymount Gateway condominium/apartments. The Planning Commission continued the item and requested clarification of several items. So I'm going to kind of walk through what you requested clarification on. And in addition, you also had some concerns about the approval of the condominium itself, and those aren't necessarily specific to the rent increase. They were provided for information, so I'm not going to review those tonight unless you have questions. So subsequent to the June 3rd public hearing, the applicant clarified his rent increase request, which is that for existing tenants, that when the term of their lease expires, they increase to market rate. And he also requested removal of future Planning Commission reviews for rent increases. The rest of the items remain consistent with the prior approvals. So like a new tenant can automatically be charged up to market rate, and tenants 62 on August 14, 2004 or 14 or have disabilities can only be increased 10% each time their lease renews. For below market rate units, the existing tenants could increase up to the maximum HUD allowable for San Mateo County at the end of their current term, and then new market rate tenants would have to meet that minimum requirement, or it couldn't exceed the minimum and maximum requirements for the below market rate units. One of the other items that Planning Commission requested information on is how much the applicant has spent on maintenance and improvements to the property. So the staff report details it by year. In general, the applicant provided us this information and has stated that they've spent more than $75,000 on flooring, over $14,000 on major appliances and toilets, over $13,000 on the pool, $100,000 on roofing, and $28,000 on hot water heaters, storage tanks, and boiler repairs. They've also made improvements to security cameras in the parking lots, the laundry room, the leasing office, the pool area, and some landscape improvements. The other item Planning Commission requested was site conditions and a site inspection. The staff report summarizes the site inspection made by commissioners, but at the end of my presentation, I'll let the commissioners present their findings to you directly. The other item that was requested was a comparison to rents that were in the general vicinity of the project as opposed to the whole city. So we did a supplement to the rent survey, which analyzed market rents for the multifamily developments closest to Marymount, including Pacifica Park, Fairmount Apartments, and Eves Pacifica. So we not only looked at just the rents, but we also looked at the amenities, and we used a matrix that we use when people apply for tax credit financing to adjust rents based upon amenities. So you pay a little more if you've got a walk-in closet and a walk-in pantry than if you don't. So we asked each apartment complex what amenities they had and went through that rent comparability matrix and either increased or decreased the rent depending on the amenities that were there comparable to the proposed project. So the end result shows what the surrounding market rate comparables would be if they had the same amenities as the proposed project. What it doesn't take into account is physical condition. We didn't go into any of those and do site inspections. So it's just straight amenities and rent. So per the original rent survey that we did, the market rents ranged from $2,900 to $3,700 for 1 and 2 bedrooms. Based on the adjusted market rents for just those 3 closest properties, the rents were from $2,600 to $3,400. So for those 3 comparables, the rents were $238 to $313 a month less than looking at the city overall. We also got an updated rent roll from the applicant from June 1st. It's an attachment D to your staff report, and there's lots of numbers there, so I just wanted to kind of condense some of the important facts there for you. If you look at the 4th column, it shows the current rent paid by the tenant. If you look at the 7th column, it shows the rent based on those 3 comparables, what it would be based upon the bedrooms and bathrooms, so what the comparable unit would be. So basically what the applicant is requesting is that the rent that's in column 4 be increased to the rents that are shown in column 7. So that shows you what the applicant is requesting. Now you can't look at the BMRs in that because the below market rate units, because those don't follow the same criteria. But for the non-below market rate units, that shows you that increase in rents. The commission also requested information on the status of the below market rate units because you were concerned that they seemed vacant on the rent roll. So the affordable housing consultant that's in charge of managing those below market rate units provided a report, an annual report. And according to that report, there are 77 tenants in the 26 units, with households varying from 1 to 7 people and an average of 3 persons per household. The leases for tenants who have been residents for many years are on a month-to-month, and the newer tenants have 1-year leases. 4 tenants had rental rates that exceeded the authorized limit, but the Marymount management is going to reduce those to meet the limits. And 4 units have households in them that exceed the income that they're allowed to have. So they will be working with those tenants based on the options that were approved originally as part of the first rent increase. So they'll either get relocation costs or the applicant will contribute to the city's housing fund the difference in the below market rate cost. So if you remember, there's 3 factors to consider in approving or denying a rent increase. It's the prevailing market rents, the condition of the units, and the Bay Area, the rental component of the Bay Area cost of living, and we went over that one last time. So the resolution that's attached to your staff report is drafted based upon the applicant's request for going up to market rate based on that rental survey supplement with the 3 closest unit complexes. But the Planning Commission has a myriad of alternatives that you could look at should you decide that the 3 factors have been met. You could do a lesser rent increase. You could schedule them in increments of time. You could do half this year, half next year. You could do a myriad of options should you choose to make those findings. Regarding the applicant's request to remove the requirement for Planning Commission approval of future rent increases, this requirement is based in city code, so staff doesn't feel it appropriate that we just ignore that and not have future rent increases come back before Planning Commission. So that kind of concludes my summary. I can either answer questions now, or we can have the Planning Commissioners give their site conditions survey results and then do questions at the end.
I would think we should, if we have questions, ask them now for what you've given, and then we can give our report, which would be separate information.
Certainly.
Okay, Commissioner Niblin?
Thank you. Thank you for walking through the work that has been done since the last meeting. I really appreciated having the clarity of your report. And again, I wanted to sort of reference back to the comparison to Skyline area developments aspect of the report. And this was sort of the revised or I guess supplemented, augmented sort of market study that was done. And to be clear, and it's stated actually very clearly here, and you've stated it again here at the meeting, various adjustments were made to the comps, I guess, the comparable developments. But one thing you couldn't really adjust for was sort of the physical condition, I understand. And it strikes me as a kind of a potentially significant factor. And I'm sort of curious about whether or not there are any goalposts or processes that we might use as we frankly hear more about the physical condition concerns, where we could, again, sort of figure out how to convert that into percentages or dollars. And I'm just sort of curious as to whether or not you as staff or as consultants have any help for us on that piece.
It's not, and I can let Stephanie speak because she did the work, but it's not a standard that we do rental surveys usually for finance applications.
Yeah.
And we do those by the standards that the state
Right.
sets out. And that's not one of the standards.
Right.
So I don't have an easy answer to that.
Right.
We'd have to kind of make it up as we went along, and we'd have to gain access
Right.
and get tenants willing to let us even go do that kind of survey.
Right, I appreciate that. And that's going to be an observation. It's not by no means a criticism at all, or it's just an observation. I mean, we only have kind of half the equation anyway with respect to all that. We know the condition of the particular units we're talking about, but we don't really have the condition of the comps that we'd be looking at. So it's really kind of unclear where we'd go with it. But I appreciate the input.
Okay, Commissioner Campbell?
Thanks for the report. Very interesting. I saw that you generated a rent roll. Well, I see the rent roll shows about roughly 40,000 per month in rent. And then I see maintenance costs of about 20 to 30,000 per month. Was there any indication, there's about a $300,000 per month differential. Was there any indication that any of that money is going towards capital improvement, other maintenance that I missed in this report, or?
Not that I have access to for information. The applicant may clarify more. All I had to compare was the amount he gave me that he had been spending on maintenance and the amount of the rents. And those, are gross rents, so I don't have, their other costs included in that.
Thank you.
Commissioner Big Stick?
Thank you for the report and for the work you've been doing. My question kind of dovetails, well, I have two questions. One of them dovetails off the last two questions we've heard. You said the term used was goalposts in terms of conditions. Ordering my thoughts. And when looking at how much of the rent is going toward improving the conditions, in alignment with the same mode of thought, is there approximately an amount of money that we should be looking for that is spent improving the conditions regularly, or?
One of the things that some people want to look at is operating expenses, not just improvements, landscaping costs, basic maintenance, payroll for staff, whatever. And unfortunately, that's not public information, it's private information, so we could probably get it from the applicant, but the idea of getting it from the other comps would be, they wouldn't want to give that up.
Without knowing that in general, is there a certain percentage we should be kind of sort of looking for in terms of, yes, this is about how much they should be spending from what they're taking in?
Not being in property management, I don't know that we could answer that question for you.
Okay. I had one other question, which I thought was clearly stated by you just now, and I thought it was clearly stated in the staff report, and because it was brought up by the applicant in the request apparently, I just want to make sure it is one more time clearly stated, and I want to ask a couple questions based on what I'm seeing so far. The Pacifica Municipal Code, Section 9-4.2455E. It was requested that we don't have to go through this process again, essentially, and because of that part of the municipal code, the suggestion is we have to keep going through this process. Is that more or less accurate?
Yes. Without a change to our zoning ordinance, it doesn't seem appropriate to just ignore that requirement.
So if we were to avoid this process, again, one method would be changing the ordinance. Is that correct? Not by us, clearly, but
Yes.
yeah. And the other question I had was, would a undoing of the condo conversion that has already gone through preclude us having to do this again? Is that a thing that can happen? And if that happened, presumably we wouldn't have to do this again, yes?
What do you mean by undoing of the condo conversion?
So initially they applied for a permit in order to do a condo conversion.
Right.
So could they essentially say, we changed our mind, we want to put it back the way it was, and undo that process where we have that permit to do that?
So that would require, there's already been a subdivision map that's been recorded, and so it would require a merging of all those properties. I don't know if Deepa has some thoughts on how that might occur, but
That's correct. At the very least, it would require a lot merger and several other approvals, I would imagine. And should all of that occur, then yes, the Planning Commission then wouldn't have purview over rent increases.
So in theory, it could happen, but it would be quite a bit of work.
Yes, I would imagine so.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Berman?
Thank you for the work in the staff report. It was very helpful. The rent roll, so you mentioned that, so the applicant wants to propose basically matching the market rent of the comps, column 7. So the 12.5% increase is the minimum that they were requesting, correct?
The they're requesting straight to market rate. We put the 12.5 column in there because that's what got approved last time.
Got it.
So you could see,
Okay, I see. Mainly, I wanted to bring it up because there is some variance with some being higher, some being lower. So it's purely, the proposal is, or the applicant wants to
propose an increase of market rate?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Niblin,
Yeah, I'm sorry, I actually had one little follow-up question, I appreciate it. And that was with respect to the maintenance budget and property improvements. And I see we've got data going back to, I guess, September of 2017 with respect to maintenance costs. And, certainly for the last quarter of 2017, a very large average of about $31,000 per month for maintenance costs. And then kind of annual for 2018, 2019, something more like, I guess, $19,494 for 2018, and then $18,148 for 2019. I was sort of curious as I was reading these figures whether or not that reflects maybe lower amounts that were spent in prior years. I'm trying to understand kind of what the longer-term trend is.
From the way they explained it, that 2017 is when we were here doing that original rent increase, and there was a large number of tenants and a large number of, hey, you need to fix, and they went in and tried to help.
Jump on stuff,
and-
which is-
And jump on the stuff, and then the 18 is only the whole year that we have available since.
Well, I was just, again, sort of trying to get a sense of kind of what happened in 14, 15, 16, and whether or not we have these numbers now as a reflection of maybe things that weren't done in those earlier years, or maybe that's an average over time that,
Yeah, I don't
again, I
have
just
the
think it's
answer.
kind of a short window, and I was curious about it.
Yeah, we only asked him for the information since the approval of the rent increase.
I see.
We didn't ask for past information. They may know generally, they may be able to answer that question.
Okay, thank you.
okay, and I have one question, and it's basically I want to affirm that although they're asking for market rate, it's not an all or nothing proposition. We can give them market rate, or we can give them less, or we can give them nothing. We have a full range of options. We're not limited to market rate or nothing.
Correct.
That's correct, based on the 3 factors in the municipal code.
Thank you. And Commissioner Big Stick?
Yeah, thank you. I had one more question. I need just a spot of clarification in my own mind, and then the question based on that. The bit about 62 or older or disabled. First of all, what's the date that
It's August of 2014, I believe.
22nd.
August 22nd of 2014?
It's actually August 14th of 2014.
So the question is, it's 62 or disabled and in before August 14th of 2014, is that correct?
It's the age of 62.
Prior to that date? So if you turned 62 after that date, you would not have that benefit, is that correct?
That's correct.
Correct.
Okay, so a part of our consideration, might it be possible to adjust the date at which that is given to somebody who's over 62 or disabled? Is that a part of what we can discuss tonight?
Yes, you can.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions, so I guess we'll move on into our report, the subcommittee's report. Okay, there we are. And this is going to be the subcommittee site inspection report for the Miramont Gateway properties. And we'll move on. Oops, well, I guess I'm turning the pointer on. Now, does that advance it? That advances it. I've got to figure out the buttons. The subcommittee consisted of Commissioners Clifford and Berman. The inspections were conducted on July 8th, 2019. Inspections included 3 units in the general site with volunteering tenants, and 2 to 3 vacant units in the process of being refurbished for new tenants with the property manager. Okay. All right. This picture shows water damage in one of the apartment ceilings, the existing water damage. And this is kind of a theme that goes back to the first inspection in 2017, is water intrusion into the units. This is one of the volunteer units, and you can see that there's clearly water damage there. There you can see, again, mold damage down in the lower corner, and over here, let me see if I can get that pointer going. This is mold damage here. And it's coming through on a regular basis. They keep painting it out, but it keeps showing up. And this here is mold and dry rot, and it's right between the shower over here and the toilet over here. And the floor is actually a little soft also in this area here. So there's water damage there. Now, moving on. Okay, now this is what was considered a repair on a countertop. Now, for whatever reason, a hole happened into the countertop, and the repair was to glue down 4 ceramic tiles over the hole rather than actually fixing the countertop. And that's disappointing to me as somebody who does kitchen and bathroom remodels all the time. This is really not up to code or standards. Okay, again, now here we are in a shower. You can see, now up here, that is an access panel that has been cut in so that they can get to the plumbing up above that's leaking and causing mold in this area. It's moldy around the outside edges of it, and there's more mold there. And then you get over here to the shower door. That's not the way the rods are supposed to run in a shower door. And there's mold all down in here. And there's additional mold throughout the shower. Okay, here's one of the vents, the exhaust vent in the bathroom, no cover. And the vent this is original equipment. Now, this was barely adequate back when this building was built in 1960-something, correct? Is that a correct statement? It was in the 60s these buildings were put up?
Oh, I don't have that date offhand.
Don't have that offhand, okay. But it's had a lot of years on it, and quite frankly, it's clear from the mold that keeps building up in the bathrooms that it's no longer adequate. It's not ventilating that bathroom, and there's no other source of ventilation. These are all enclosed bathrooms. And I'm of the opinion that these need to be changed out with modern exhaust fans and possibly the ductwork being cleaned out after all these years. Okay, now this is the laundry room, and here's another area of water damage in the sink, in the ceiling, excuse me. So the ceiling is now, got bubbling paint, water is clearly coming through up there. And this is their laundry area. And then moving on here, now this is a section of the property where you're underneath, on the other side of this wall is where the cars park. And then there's this void in here, and there's all kinds of garbage and stuff in there, leftover coolers, and if we move on, we're moving on to the trash. Well, I'll move on to the trash. We have, oops, I hit the wrong button, let's go back. Here we have, the trash is no longer in enclosed areas, which I believe is a common condition of approval when we're approving buildings, that they have enclosed areas for their trash. All of the doors have been removed from the trash areas. They're open to the outside, and the trash is clearly escaping. And there's also this stuff is, these walls and stuff are in pretty bad shape. Let's move on. Here's some damage where something ran into it. Now this is outside in the carport area, and there's damage there. This concerns me a great deal. Now this is the steps going up into an apartment. This is what holds the step on, and the concrete is deteriorating right at the connection. So this whole step is in a condition of deterioration and not safe. Here we have an example of dry rot, and there's dry rot up in here. This has dry rotted and to the point where the banister is actually sagging. This is more of it down here. So this whole balcony area needs to be taken care of again. And here, one of the things I wanted to point out is we have a piece of molding that apparently had to be replaced, but if you look right here, what you're seeing is that it was a very haphazard repair. And this is common throughout the buildings. It seems to be a standard repair scenario where something's just slammed in and it's not waterproof. The water comes down here and then it hits this and then it's all in behind here. Okay, and I guess that's that. So that's what I have to say. Commissioner Berman, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I mean, I think you touched on most everything, Commissioner Clifford. My personal biggest concern was the mold. The bottom units had the most evidence of mold, to the extent where even one of the units that was currently inhabited, you could feel the moisture when you walked in, and you could smell kind of the mildewy mold scent. And I think it kind of borders a health concern. So that was my biggest concern. One item, just reviewing the staff report for this week, that efforts have gone into appliances, but during our tours of the units, a lot of the appliances, there were complaints they're either broken, they haven't been properly repaired. They all appeared to be fairly old, and Commissioner Clifford, you're probably more familiar with newer models of kitchen equipment, but even when we toured the renovated units, the units that were going to have new tenants, a lot of the appliances were the same ones in the units where tenants have been there for 7 years or so, several years at least. So I was kind of curious exactly what the major appliances that were mentioned. I think it was $14,654 for major appliances. Granted, I know there's a lot of units on this property, but yeah, I'd have to say the lack of sufficient repairs that Commissioner Clifford pointed out and the mold were of my biggest concerns.
I'm going to pick up again. In that one unit where the mold and moisture was so bad that we noticed it on entering, after being in that unit for 10 minutes, I was starting to experience an asthma attack, and I had to leave the apartment. I was literally suffering from being in that apartment. Another thing that a picture didn't get on into the display was in that section that was between the cars and that underground, the building section, it had the appearance of somebody having lived in it, and there was also an actual open pit with a pipe in it, and another pipe that came from the outside and hung over the pit so that water dripped into the pit. So we had this, I'm going to say 18-inch by 18-inch square of stagnant water sitting there. And that's not good for anybody, just in terms of mosquitoes and other things. That's something that the building owner needs to look into in terms of taking care of that and making sure the pipe needs to be connected. I don't know what's going on there. Also, in that underground area, one of the things I picked up and found was a gallon can, thankfully, was empty of gasoline, a gasoline can. So that area needs to be checked every once in a while so that you don't wind up with dangerous materials underneath living structures. So I think that pretty much covers everything that I wanted to say about our visit. I do want to acknowledge that, yes, the apartments, the laundry area was greatly improved. There was all new appliances in there, and they are in the process of doing the roofs. And if I remember correctly, they're doing a building in one section, and then they're going over to the other section and doing a building there. So it's basically one a month is going to get done until all the buildings are done. If that's what you remember. And I want to congratulate them on that. But I think that getting the roofs done is a great thing to have happen, but the buildings literally have a moisture and mold issue that was actually recognized back when we voted for the condo conversion, because one of the things that was part of our conditions of approval of that is that they were going to redo the failing stucco outside, to replace all the windows with double pane windows, basically get rid of the moisture problems that the buildings had. And that was roughly 11, 12 years ago. And they are making progress at this point in terms of sealing the roofs up, but the water is now past the roofs. It is now inside the walls of those buildings and of those apartments. I am deeply concerned for the health of the people that live there. Commissioner Berman, you had something else to add?
Yeah, another item I don't think we touched on. Some of the units, one in particular that was currently being inhabited, had electrical issues, a wall that was experiencing moisture, and again, it was a lower level unit. The outlets were spotty. Was it the outlets or the switches?
As I remember it, the outlets were, mostly they didn't work, but they were intermittent, which is not a good sign.
Right. So that's a concern, possibly hazardous. But as Commissioner Clifford said, there were some improvements from my understanding from the previous inspection. I know that they did a lot of work on the pool. People were using the pool while we visited. The common areas looked very nice. The leasing office was nice. So, yeah, I think definitely a lot of room for improvement, but it looks like there are some efforts.
Okay, and that concludes our report. So I think we should be now moving on to the applicant. The applicant would like to come up and speak.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to address this again. I'm glad you noticed the improvement from when we were here in 2017, and that continues. We don't know which units you actually looked at. We don't know, when you say they were volunteers, were they people that have been there a long time? Are they people that have proved themselves over a period of time to be problem tenants? Based on the 170 tenants we have, you always have a few people that are somewhat disgruntled. Some of them are not very good at maintaining their own units or cleaning, and we don't know whether you got cherry-picked or not. I think it's more indicative of the units that were shown to you as being in the process of being refurbished for new tenants. That is the product that is going forward, and that is the product that we need additional funds to continue the improvements on. And I think that that's something you need to keep in mind. The comment was made about, well, there's $340,000 a month in income, but only a certain amount for maintenance. That's ongoing maintenance. You got to remember, we also have capital improvements, we have debt service, and we have property taxes, which are fairly significant. The common areas, which we believe are our responsibility to keep up on a day-to-day basis, are all in good shape. Lastly, we are, in looking at the staff report and the recommendation of the staff report, which was to approve the resolution that was given to us, we are willing to say that that is an appropriate resolution for tonight. The big problem that I have, and I've expressed this to you before, is part of the process. The process, completely unknown to me, is why it takes 14 months to have one of these applications heard. For example, as you know from the report, property rents and everything go up on an annual basis somewhere between 3 and 6, sometimes as much as 8% a year. So in the 18 months it takes us from when we were here in 2017 to where we are today, we've had probably a 12% increase in rents. And I do this quite a bit. I mean, I've had full-blown EIRs on major projects that have been acted upon in 9 months to a year. Mitigated negative declarations in 4, 5, or 6 months. Why it takes 14 months to have a rent application reviewed is beyond me. And what that means is whatever we get tonight, if it's anything less than going to market, we're already behind the 8 ball. Does that mean that we should file a new application tomorrow morning if it's going to take 14 months to have it heard? I've never really had an explanation from staff on why this takes so much longer than other things that come before you on a regular basis. And part of it, I'd also like to address Commissioner, and my eyes are, the gentleman on the end, Bostic?
Big Stick.
Big Stick, okay. Good Teddy Roosevelt aficionado, yeah. One of the problems with the Pacifica ordinance is it doesn't comply with the Subdivision Map Act. Subdivision Map Act does have a provision where you can do a condo conversion and enter into a 10-year agreement with the city that it will stay as a rental project. That was not part of whoever drafted your ordinance. Also, in other cities, they do have the ability to have a subdivision map approved because there's 2 elements to this. There's the subdivision map, and then there's the conditional use permit that allows you to operate as a condominium. You can map it under the subdivision map as condominiums and then continue to operate it under a conditional use permit as a rental project. But that was not put into your statute when it was, I think, drafted back in the 1990s. So that's part of, I think, why we asked for relief from having to come back on an annualized basis. With that said, we have several, I know there's several people that want to talk tonight, since this is the only item on the agenda. I think the resolution as drafted and as recommended by your staff is appropriate. Remember, based upon the conditions of the property last time, you gave us 12.5% rent increase, which was half of what the market rate was at that time. 12.5% now would only bring us to market rate in 2017. And I would also remind everyone that you need to make findings tonight that are based upon facts and not emotions or other aspects, because they are important. The findings are exceedingly important. Other than that, I'm going to cede the rest of my time to whomever would like to speak, unless you have questions.
Yeah, a question, and thanks for reminding us about the need to establish facts here tonight. You mentioned that, I was the commissioner who brought up the differential between the 20 to 30,000 that you spend monthly on monthly maintenance versus the 350 that comes in versus on rental income. So there's a 300,000 differential, and you mentioned that that doesn't take into account capital improvement, costs associated with certain things, or I imagine some other monthly or annual expenses, I think you mentioned. Are those something that you can document? Because those would be things that would be helpful to see in the record.
But, I mean, we can do if you want to do a full audit, but the other thing to keep in mind that this process is not inexpensive. I mean, I think it costs us $40,000 to consultants and staff time to have this application applied for. If you're asking us to do a full audit of all our books, I mean, I guess that could be done, but, you know, you're looking at another $25,000 or $30,000 to accountants.
Well, to be clear, I'm not asking for a full audit, but we are talking about some deferred maintenance costs here, and we're at a $3.5 million differential between rents coming in and monthly maintenance costs. So you would, I'm sure it's a curious situation for us when, at least for this commissioner, when you see deferred maintenance costs, but you see a black box, I guess, of a $3.5 million differential per year. Where's that money going?
Well, I don't know, and again, I'm the land use guy, I'm not the accountant, and I'm not going to try and posit it. The other side of that coin is, what are you comparing it to? What's your basis? I mean, you know, you say it doesn't seem like much, but is it? I don't know. You would have to go to like one of the apartment associations to figure all that out, and see what, you know, trends are. And you have some big apartment, you know, Aimco's in your town and things like that. I mean, they have this stuff down to a science. My clients are two LLCs that are rather small-time investors.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we could get into discussion of who would have the burden of showing that. I'm not sure it would be you or the city.
Well, we can show our numbers, but my question is what do you compare them to? You know, say instead of 15,000, it's 40,000. Is that the right number? Should the number be 80,000? I don't know. And unless you've got some way of comparing that, in other words, you know, going to industry groups and all that other kind of stuff to come up with those numbers, you come up with a number, I don't know whether the number has any meaning to it.
Well, as we lawyers love to say, a reasonable number would be the number.
Well, a reasonable number has to be in comparison to all the factors, and that's what I don't know what the factors are. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's exactly, we don't know what those facts are or factors either at the moment, it seems.
And I don't think any of those factors were envisioned in your statute or the three conditions. You know, the three conditions are the market, the three conditions are CPI, and the three conditions are the general conditions of the property, not how much is spent, not whether they make a 2% profit or a 20% profit.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I have two questions. Because I think, in my mind, what factors into the amount spent on improvements is the conditions of the units as they currently are. And my concern is, well, are these conditions going to be improved within however long a period of time for me to say, yes, absolutely, these are worth market rate, and so that's what we should do, or however this deliberative process is going to go on. And so dovetailing, first of all, of Commissioner Clifford's question, my question is, to the best of your knowledge, do you have some idea what the people you represent think a reasonable amount for maintenance should be?
I don't have a clue.
Okay. My other question, which does not have to do with that, and again, I think it was already basically answered, but I like to make sure that the obvious is set and obvious so that the rest doesn't have to think about it anymore. When a new tenant moves in, to the best of your knowledge, do they come in paying market rent?
Yes, that's the current, that was approved in 2017.
Okay, thank you very much.
But that was the market rate in 2017, not today.
So if somebody were to move in today freshly, they'd be paying the market rate of 2017 or the market rate of today?
As far as I know, it is not the market rate, which is 35 or 40% above that right now.
I'm sorry, again, clarity. If somebody were to move into a vacant unit today, would they be paying today's market rate?
They would not be paying $3,000 to $4,000, no.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Brown.
Just kind of touching off of Commissioner Campbell's questions, and looking at the comparison of what's spent on maintenance with what comes in rent, holistically, I think as we consider the three items that we're able to consider for whether or not rent gets increased, one of which is understanding that with the rent increase, there will be more funds for maintenance, which is likely why the applicant would like rent increase partially. But it helps us to understand what proportion of the increase in rent will go to benefiting the maintenance of the property and just some issues that we see that could be improved on. Right now, the proportion is very low. I mean, it's $3 to $4 million of rent coming in, and then there's only like 19,000 being spent per month. So that's kind of why, if there is a rent increase, is it really going to help boost that maintenance funding? In which case, the item of the condition of the units, that's mainly the one that I'm concerned with, the cost being, the funds being put into maintenance. Because if I feel confident that with an increase in rent, an increase in rent coming into the maintenance funds, I'd feel more confident that the units I saw might have improvement. And this includes the units that we inspected that were being renovated. I know there were a couple mold issues in those, and bathroom vent issues. So just, I wanted to kind of put my thoughts on the record for why we, the commissioners, originally requested the comparison of what's spent on maintenance and what comes in rent.
My question to you is, how much should we be putting into maintenance? Can you give me a number?
No, unfortunately not.
Can I?
It's all related, and in understanding the amount that rent gets increased, then hopefully the amount of maintenance funds would increase as well. But it helps us to understand currently what that ratio is.
The problem I have, and this is what I was getting at with Commissioner Campbell, is that I don't know what that ratio is either. You know, if you say we'll allow $1,000 a month rent, should all of that go into a maintenance fund? Should 80% of it go into a maintenance fund? Should 50%? I don't have those figures. You don't have those figures. I don't know how you can make that a factual finding and determination at this hearing.
Can I jump in, Commissioner?
Commissioner Niblin's next, and then you can come back in. How's that? Is that fair? Commissioner Niblin?
Thank you. And this probably maybe better even directed to staff. I mean, I have a recollection that the county's housing department at one point had an inspection program that sort of dealt with certain units, I guess certain buildings that had kind of high levels of tenant concerns expressed. And I had some recollection that maybe some of these units at some point had been a part of that county sort of inspection program. And curious, I have a recollection also that in a report we looked at maybe a couple of months ago, it was sort of stated that the county at this point has taken this particular set of buildings off of its program. And could you refresh our recollection about that?
Yeah, that's correct. So the county does do regular inspections if there's a reason for the county to do. I believe their routine is every 4 years.
Yeah.
And so if there's a reason to come back sooner, they put a property on a more often loop. But in 2017, that was their last inspection, and they took this property off of the need for more often inspections.
Yeah, working for county council, my recollection was that it was every 2 years if there was a concern, or maybe it was even more frequent than that. But that this particular development was brought to a condition where it was no longer viewed that there was a need for that frequent inspection. And I guess at the end of the day, I mean, I've got concerns obviously about habitability, but it seems like there are probably ways to, and it's certainly relevant because it goes directly to condition, but just wanted to make sure we have kind of all these facts on the table.
I have a
Following
quick
up on-
follow-up on that question, and then I'll get to Commissioner Campbell. When the county inspects, do they inspect individual units, or do they just inspect the property in general?
That I don't know. I don't have the answer to that.
Okay.
There's two things about that, Mr. Clifford, that I think are important. One is the way you've described the project, you make it sound like it's a slum, and it's not. Comparison to the housing stock in San Mateo County, this project has been no worse than any other. And that, I think, is reflected by the fact that the county has not selected it for a higher level of scrutiny. If anyone in this commission, any one of the tenants in this project, think that there are housing code violations, they are perfectly willing or perfectly able to make a complaint to the San Mateo County Housing Department or even your own building department. And the problem is that the vast majority of the 170 people who live here apparently don't have that level of concern.
Could I just?
This is one of the owners. He has a speaker slip in, so I don't know.
Okay, I'm going to first let Commissioner Campbell ask his question. He's been very patient here.
Thank you, and actually the owner might be able to answer it. And just to be clear, I just wanted to clarify, I wasn't asking for a ratio or a notion of what is fair. My question was, it looked at first as if you've got a monthly cost and for maintenance and outlay of $20,000 to $30,000 with a $300,000 differential coming in for, where's that money going? You mentioned, maybe it seemed low to you too, I'm not sure, but you mentioned, well, wait, that doesn't take into account capital improvement projects and some other expenses that we don't know about and that, or at least I don't see reflected in the record. So that's what I'm asking about, because, and maybe the owner can explain that.
Let me answer a couple of questions. We are actually having to dig into our own pockets to fund some of the improvements for the project, precisely because for the last decade we've been kept under market. Those roofs that we're doing that you know about is $30,000 to $40,000 per roof. The money is not coming out of the system. We've got a bunch, we are not some big REIT that's come from Wall Street that has a ton of money. It's doctors, engineers, all local investors that put money into this community, bought this building. We are local guys who own this. We are not some guys that are just doing some financial engineering. To answer your question really simply, these roofs, we cannot do the roofs from the income we've got. We are lending money back to the LLC. That's where we are today, because our rents have been hammered for so long. Utility costs have been going up for the last decade. Give you an example. PG&E, $17,000 a month is what we are paying. Our mortgage, $80,000 a month. Utilities, water and sewage, $22,000, another $17,000. The city's costs keep going up. And to your point, Commissioner Clifford, I could take photographs and show this. I can show wires running here. This is in one building. If you cherry pick what makes for a bad situation, of course, in a building with 170 units, you can absolutely find problems. We are trying the best we can to continue to invest with very limited amounts of capital that are available. To answer your question, absolutely. If we had the rents, we'd be able to make more expansive decisions than having to dip into our own pockets to keep on making the improvements. There is no deep-pocketed Wall Street money here. Every one of us investors, except for maybe one guy out of Sacramento, is a local person that lives here. There are guys here, investors, who are in their 70s. They put their retirement into this money. Some of them have come and asked for loans to pay for their grandchildren to be able to educate them, because there's no cash flow that they were all expecting. We're only having this discussion because we made, at some point, a strategic error to go and do a condo conversion. As they said, if we could reverse this, if we had not gone so far down this path, if we could reverse this and just be a rental property, we would not have this meeting. We would be able to charge, what we are asking for is market rents. What is a market rent? Let's keep it really simple. A market rent is the rent a new person comes in, deals with our manager and says, I'm willing to pay you this. They've done their own analysis. They've checked out the 5 properties. If somebody else at 2,700 is a Ritz-Carlton, and we are at 2,400, that's an average property, and there's a dump that's asking for 1,900, and they want to live in our property at 2,300, that is truly market rent. So when tenants, they're being disingenuous when they say, oh, we are living in a shitty place, we hate this location, but we don't want to move out. That doesn't make sense. If the place is so bad, you are welcome. We are not forcing anybody to continue living here. But let us get the rents that there'll be the do-gooders who say, oh, there are tenants who need to have a lifestyle to live here. We are the only property in the whole city of Pacifica that has been tied down to this kind of a rent. There is not another property. The guys who've had this rent have had a lottery. They could have been living in any other property in Pacifica. They would have been paying market rent. I am saying, let us charge market rent. If you want to define market rent, we can give you open books. Look at the last 10 or 15 rentals, arm's length pricing. We offer the rent, somebody moves in. We offer the rent, somebody moves in. That's market rent. They're willing to live in this dump. They're willing to live with all the issues and the garbage and so on and so forth. We are willing to come here and say this is not a risk for us because there are wires hanging here. That's not fair. That's
So
not.
thank you. I mean, I appreciate the explanation of market rent, but do you live, you said you're local guys, you live in Pacifica?
I don't. My investor, I'm local in the Bay Area. We're all local people here.
Okay, well, that can mean a lot of things, but the other thing I wonder about is, I mean, I don't want to get too much into philosophies, but people just being able to find a place to rent, I mean, I think it ignores a lot of the rental problems in this Bay Area right now. But I think we're getting into a side discussion we probably don't need to get into.
Pacifica, is that the problem for just these two LLCs? We are in a peculiar place. There was a logic for why you guys should be controlling the rent. Let's remember what the logic was. Developers come along, they do a condo conversion, and then they forcibly push out tenants when they're ready to sell the condos. It was to protect people from that. It was not for any other reason that we were supposed to come to you guys for getting approval. The idea was don't push out tenants unfairly, because in a condo conversion, you're supposed to pay a tenant some amount of money when they leave, when you're ready to sell the unit. That was the purpose. We're not doing that. We're just purely a rental unit right now. That's all we are.
Okay, I want to thank you very much for your explanation and your comments. And we're well past the 10 minutes on the applicants.
I have 2 minutes.
No. If you have a card in, I will listen to you then, and then you'll have 3 minutes. Any other questions before I move on to the opening the public portion of the hearing? Okay, I am going to open the public portion of the hearing. I have currently a few cards. I'm going to start with Gary Meyer. Would Gary Meyer like to come up and speak?
My name's Gary Meyer. Been a
Thank you.
Pacifican since 1971. Raised my family here. My grandchildren live here. I worked hard all my life. I'm the 70-something guy he was talking about.
Could you pull the mic over to your mouth, please? That would help.
Sorry.
That's good.
I'm the 76-year-old guy he was talking about. I worked hard all my life, saved some money, sacrificed, invested in this project. And now I'm told we can't charge market rents. We got to take care of the people that are in there. Well, I care about the people that are in there. They're my neighbors. But I also care about my own livelihood. And where is this money supposed to come from to do all the improvements that you're suggesting if we can't get close to market rent? Now, I'm going to suggest something that maybe my partners won't like. Maybe a compromise. Just let us go to the BMR. Tell us, okay, go to those rates for all the units. Let's just say it's okay to go to BAR. You don't want to go to market. Then let's see what kind of improvements we do, because you know we got to come back next year if we want anything more. And you can do your inspection next year, and you'll see if that money wasn't spent for the right reasons. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Linda Marty? I'm sorry, I'm always terrible with names.
I'm a long-term resident here for more than 30 years. I'm a homeowner, so I'm not a renter, but I care deeply about our city. I happen to have firsthand knowledge of this particular apartment complex because I have friends there, and so I've gone over there for more than 10 years to see it. Before I get into the condition of the place, I'm glad that you have noticed some problems, because I'll skip to that first. Yes, over the years, my opinion of this building is that it was extremely, to say that it was extremely under-maintained is very an understatement. There's always been lots and lots of problems. I was astonished we're going to try and do a condo conversions. I would never want to buy the building like that with the different structural stuff that you could see were issues with it. But besides that, what I want to say is that what bothered me the most about this is, in general, first of all, I should say that I am a landlord. I own property, rental property, not in Pacifica, but other places. So I know very much what it's like to be, a landlord in rental units. And I just wanted to point out that the rental rates that they're asking for, I think, are just unconscionable. If you actually look at, for example, a person whose rent I know is currently $1,400. She's a single individual, she's a senior, and they want to make her go to fair market value, which would be $2,600. That would be a rental increase of 85%. 85% for a rental increase. I've owned a number of different units. I usually raise rents less than 5%. If I can do it 3 or 4, I do. I have never even raised somebody 10%. 85%, people can't afford those kind of increases. It's just not right, So, I think if you're talking about something, it should be, if you're going to give them a rate increase, it should be something where you can actually see how much it is, 10% or whatever, but not this fair market stuff. I also wanted to say that, on this, normally as a landlord, I have to maintain my buildings. I don't have to, there's different code things, but I want to maintain them in nice condition, and so I do. And I pay whatever I need to maintain my building. And that's part of, to me, when you buy property, you have to have reserves. And so at times, if you just recently bought a property or whatever, due to your carrying costs and your interest rates, you will be losing money. And I have done that. But that's part of buying a property, and eventually you make a bunch of money on them. If you stay in there long enough. So, as an investor, you know that. That's how property works. So, the thing is, you don't need to have a rent increase in order to maintain a building. You should always be maintaining the building. And obviously, there's no guarantee if you give a rental increase. If a person has not been maintaining it for the past years, there's no guarantee we'll go to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Suzanne Mork. Okay. Yeah.
Good evening, Commissioners. The on-site survey reveals poor maintenance of this property. The past rent increases far exceed what has been spent on maintenance. So I feel the Planning Commission should recommend no rent increase, and of course that future petitions for rent increase must continue to be approved through the Planning Commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Wanda Whitaker? I think I got it right this time.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Wanda Whitaker, and I live in Marymount Gateway Apartments. And thank you so much for taking the time out to even address this issue, and also allowing me the opportunity to speak. I have been a longtime resident or tenant at Marymount Gateway Apartments since 2003, which represents almost 16 years. I consider myself a stellar tenant. I've always paid my rent on time. I'm very quiet. I have no complaints against me except for the parking issues, which have been most challenging for visitors. It is not our fault that the landlord has been increasing the rent yearly by 5 to 8%, or has not been doing it yearly. And now, because of a soft market in 2008 and a couple of lawsuits over the years, creates a situation whereby we must now be overburdened with a substantial hike in rent. This is not only challenging, but although lawful, unethical. Since the language has drastically changed from the original application of 25% to be broken into halves of 12.5% and another 12.5% after improvements to the property were made, to request a maximum BMR, that is one person with a household income of $96,850 a year, or to market rate at the end of term, is unfathomable. Mostly all long-time tenants are on a month-to-month terms and not a lease. BMR maximum represents a 60% more or more increase in rent, and market rate much more. I think the landlord is being quite disingenuous. Also, I must emphasize people with disabilities and seniors, especially long-time renters such as myself that turned 62 after the date of August 14, 2014, we rightfully should qualify for not more than a 10% increase. I'll be 65 years of age this coming September, and chances are I will be least likely to become employed, making the amount of income because of my age. So what I'm asking you to consider is lowering the rental rate for seniors 62 or over to 10%, and a rent increase not to exceed 12.5% for other tenants. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask for some help with that one.
Arjun Bhagat? Oh, you've already spoken, yes, sir.
He's already spoken. Okay, we'll leave that at that. Stephen McDonald? Oops, some more.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Steve McDonald. I'm Vice President of Property Management for HIP Housing, and Nori Jaba here is our consultant. She owns her own consulting firm. And so really what I wanted to just mention was that we were hired by the Marymount Gateway Group on December 1 of last year, to perform the compliance for the BMR program tenants. And the report that you have in the agenda, the 14-page report, came from our work over the last however many months, that's 9 months. The message that we wanted to say was that the process is very time-consuming. It, in fact, took about 6 months to get everybody to comply. And so we created a form when we first started that required the tenants, or told them that they had to participate in the process. And overall, they were very cooperative, but it is a long process. Some people were holdouts and have given us a little bit of grief, but overall, they cooperated. And so I wanted to have Nori give you a couple of key points, and then we'll be done.
Hello, thank you. Yes, so as Steve said, I did all of the income certifications and met with all of the tenants, and as was said earlier in the summary, 4 tenants were over income and 4 tenants were over on the rent limits. So those have been corrected. The rents have come down for those tenants that were over, and those that are over income, that's being addressed with the Marymount management. I wanted to point out that for tenants that are over income, the way the resolution is written, there's nothing really that can be done. They're welcome to stay in their units, and I believe all of them are staying in their units. And while we don't want to displace anybody else, I also want to point out that those tenants are still in those units, taking away a low-income unit for somebody who really does need it. And I know we're out of time, so I'll just wrap up very quickly.
You have 1 more minute.
Okay. So with the tenants that are remaining, almost all of them are low-income tenants, though we have moderate-income units and low-income units. A great majority of them are low-income, so they are greatly benefiting from the BMR designation. So that is really helping the community. And Marymount rents, even with the increases of 10% for seniors or disabled, or 12.5% for the others, are well below the BMR limits. And that is an anomaly. You know, when you go and look for BMR housing elsewhere in the county, you're going to pay the BMR limit rent in most cases. So to have it way under is a real benefit for the community. So I just wanted to point out those changes. And if you have any questions, we're here and happy to meet with you individually as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I have just 20 seconds more, or no?
I'm sorry.
Okay, all right.
John Keener.
Good evening, commissioners and staff. This decision rests on 3 components, and it is the third, the condition of the units, that is in question. Staff takes pains in their report to say that they haven't verified the condition of the apartments or indeed other claims of the owners. The Planning Commission Subcommittee has inspected several apartments, and as we've heard, found that maintenance was lacking. Mold is a common issue. Intermittently working outlets. One unit was missing a shower door, and the bathroom vents seemed inadequate. Add to that issues with mold around the windows and so on from 2 years ago. This is despite the owner spending an average of $21,000 a month, much of it on exterior issues like roofs, which, granted, need maintenance also. But rents have increased by $53,000 a month over the same period, an average of 19% in less than 2 years. Some of this is due to raising rent when a unit is vacated, but some is due to the 12% increase granted 2 years ago. I have little sympathy for owners who have failed to maintain the condition of their apartments for the tenants. This goes back more than 2 years since the last rent increase. The owners claim poverty. Talk is cheap. Let them open their books. Don't take their word for it. I would give them no increase until the condition of the units improves. Fix all the plumbing, replace appliances, and get rid of the mold. If you do grant an increase, how about extending the 10% cap on increases for seniors and disabled? Make it so that it applies to anyone when they reach 62, not when they reach 62 on a certain date 4 or 5 years ago. In summary, I don't believe the owners have merited an increase because they failed to maintain the tenants' apartments despite a 19% increase in total rents. Thank you.
Thank you. Teresa Tobias.
Commissioners, thank you for this time. I wasn't really planning to speak, but I needed to address some things that were brought up and clarify some things. So the owner has said that they have been prevented from raising rates. And that is true because I've been in this apartment for 15 years. And when they applied for condo conversion, part of that is that they couldn't raise rents for 2 years after the application, which there was a lawsuit that was brought, and it was found that they did raise it. And so this lawsuit took 8 years to resolve itself. And so yes, they couldn't raise the rates for 8 years. So I think that the situation they're in at is something that they made themselves. So in those 8 years that they couldn't raise rates, does that mean they didn't maintain it? So now that they can come to you and ask for rates to be raised, does that mean they're going to do all the things that they should have done in those 8 years that they couldn't get those rates raised? I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but so I'm here to say I think it's not fair to, in the 3 years since they were able to get raise rates, that they're going to get market rate to make up for the 8 years they couldn't get to market rates in the 3 years that they're not able to get increases. So I'm here to just say I think it's not fair to go all the way to market rate, but should you consider giving them an increase, I think the 12.5% would be fair, which is what you guys had set in 2017. Thank you.
Thank you. David Photo? Close. I
Good
got the
evening.
David part right.
Hey, no worries. Thank you again for allowing me to speak here for a moment. I'll be quick. So first thing I'd like to say is that I wish no one ill will, and I thank you all for coming here, take a moment and listen to us all. I've had the pleasure of living with a lot of these people around here, including these group right here, as a neighbor, and I've never had a problem with them. I obviously was once a Marine, 8 years raw, but I've never had a physical altercation, verbal, any kind of disagreements with them. Noise is very low. People are very, very agreeable. And in fact, on more than one occasion, I've seen Bruce and that young gentleman back there helping each other out with each other's cars. And I would say we have quite a nice community right here, especially with Wanda making sure that everyone's doing okay and keeping an eye on things. So I would find it very dishonest for anybody saying that somebody is a problem tenant. My second thing is the comment made about cherry picking. I mean, like I said, I've lived here for 6 years, and I was up here last time, and I said I watched it slowly deteriorate. As being a man of my conscience and a prior Marine, I have a tendency not to lie, and sometimes I don't sugarcoat things. I'm not saying that this place is a hellhole. I never said it was a slump. In fact, I think Pacifica is a pretty nice place. That's why I stuck around here. And you're correct. No one is sticking a gun to our head saying you must live here. But let's also be honest. Right now, in this state particularly, especially in the Bay Area, there is a huge amount of increase in rent and cost of living. I agree with the landowner. He's getting hit with those costs too. But also us as well, we are getting hit with those costs. Our families are getting hit with those costs. My son is getting hit with those costs. So what I am seeing right now is it just keeps going up, up, and up, and up, and not enough people are doing much about it, which leads to my third and final point. I would also like to remind everybody again that there is an Assembly Bill 1482, I'm going to read this right here real quick, from Assemblyman David Chu, I hope I said it correctly, who is a Democrat for San Francisco. So he would obviously have enough experience and know-how that, hey, no, there is a huge problem right now with the cost of living, and especially in the rental space. Basically what this is doing is it wanted to put an annual cap statewide and 7%. And to me, I think that's fairly agreeable. If you were to give the landowners or the owners an increase tonight, I would ask politely that you keep it at that 7%, because if the state's saying that's what's good across the state, I think it's good enough for Pacifica as well. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Gloria Stefan?
Good evening. Thank you for letting me come and speak to you. I'm not really prepared, but I did speak once before when the applicant first came to the commission. And my major concern is the inspections that did occur, I guess, within the last 2 months or so. And this mold issue is really very caustic. Commissioner Clifford said he almost felt like he was going to have an asthma attack, and I have asthma, and that's not fun. I am hoping that with this in mind, that the owners, the landlords can understand my concern. I know they have in their hearts the need and want to improve their units. However, it's really important, as the gentleman that spoke before me, to understand that we've got a real issue with the rents and how they're hitting not just Pacifica, but the Bay Area, and to maybe put a certain cap on where we're at with this rent issue. My concern is at this point in time, though, not to allow any rent hike until this mold issue is taken care of. This really bothers me. I'm sure there's children involved in some of these units, and that really concerns me. Thank you.
Thank you. That's my last card. Is there anybody else who would like to speak? You can come up and speak, say your name into the mic, and fill out a card and make sure it gets to staff,
Okay,
please.
thanks. My name is Gwen Aponte, and I am the present property manager. And I would have to say that I agree with everything that was said here today, absolutely. But I am going to buffer that with, not everybody that's here I have ever seen. I have gone to some apartments when invited, and if there is a mold issue, a mildew issue, I'm like, yeah, you need to open the windows. There are people that don't open the windows. There are people that never turn on their fan. I can't help you if you don't want to be helped. I have a cheat sheet, how to beat the mildew. You have to know how to clean. You have to want to clean. You have to dry your bathroom. You cannot have 5 people taking a shower and think that you're going to turn on that fan for 3 minutes and it's going to take away the problem. You said something about the bottom of the, actually it was the laundry room. That's people taking a bath, an overflow problem. I don't do laundry every day, but that was not like that. And when it is like that, we fix it. If you come into my office, hey, how you doing? What can I do for you today? You want a carpet? I'll get you a carpet. You want to know how much money I spend? Until I get into trouble. My boss is right there. That's how much money we spend. The more money I have, the more money I spend. I will replace your window if it's broken, whether you broke it or not, because that's what we have to do. That's my job. You want a nice place to live? I'll give you a nice place to live. But how much are you willing to do? You want a carpet? I'll get you a carpet, but you have to move all the furniture. No, that's okay. I don't want to do that. Then I can't get you a carpet. If your refrigerator is not working because you put so much stuff into it that the fan breaks, I'll send somebody to fix it. But if on the 3rd try, I have to replace the refrigerator because now it's costing me half as much as to buy a new one, I'll do that too. But you have to open the windows, you have to clean. I can't help you how you live, but I can help you make it better. Anybody here that's been here, except the people that don't live in my property, they've had something replaced. I can make it happen for you, but do you want to make it happen for yourself? You want to know how much money goes to maintenance? How much money you going to give me? I'll get in trouble for it, and I'm willing, and he knows it. But I can't help you if you can't help me.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Campbell, did you have a question?
No.
Just old light, or you just banged it? Whichever. That's the end of the public comments, and now I'm going to give the applicant 3 minutes to rebut. Or add.
Just a couple of things. The issue of the 62 age limit, it's statutory, it's in your statute. It's as of the date of the filing of the subdivision map. You can't change it, I can't change it, okay? So that, I don't think that's a proper even consideration for you tonight. The question I have is, you want us to spend more of the rent increase on maintenance. Tell us how much, and explain to us how you came up with that formula. That's the problem that I have. Just saying that, well, you need to spend more doesn't do us any good, okay? The issue, plain and simple, is and Arjun pointed it out, the whole purpose of why we're here is because the statute doesn't want the landlord raising the rents precipitously to clear the place out and displace tenants. This group has, in the, I can't believe it's 14 years since they made the application for the condo conversion, they haven't evicted anybody, they haven't displaced any tenants, and they don't have any intention of doing so. And that is the whole purpose of your review of the rent increases, to make sure that those rent increases are not punitive to drive people out, to displace them. And that is, I think, what is getting lost here. We've heard a lot of people talk about the economic problems in the Bay Area. This project and this city is not going to be able to deal with those issues. This is not a rent control ordinance that you're dealing with tonight. This is not a rent-controlled property. The arguments about what's fair and all that other kind of stuff are very genuine, but they're not germane to your consideration for you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, I'm going to bring it back to the commission for discussion. Commissioner Campbell.
Thank you. Well, I do appreciate everyone coming out tonight, the applicant as well as the tenants. So, just to put it simply, you know, I read in the staff report that the March 2017 rent roll submitted by the applicant for the previous rent increase application detailed $280,000 and change in monthly rent. The total rents, according to the rent roll 2 years later, is $335,000 and change. So there's a $50,000 increase in those 2 years. And then I noticed that in those 2 years, you know, it went from $31,000 per month in monthly rent in 17. I mean, sorry, it went $31,000 in monthly maintenance in 2017, going down to 19 in 2018 and down to 18 again. So the trend line was curious, and so I asked a question. I said, there's a differential of $300,000 basically. You've got a trend line of monthly maintenance going down while your rental income is going up. So I asked the question, where's the money going, basically? What explains that differential? And what I understood from applicant's representative was that there was other numbers out there that we should be taking into consideration, some capital expenditure numbers, and the applicant also helpfully provided some numbers as well, the owner. But that's not on the record. And we're an adjudicator, you know, somewhat of an adjudicatory body here. We're basing our decision on the record and facts in the record, and we're supposed to look at maintenance or the condition of the property as something that we base a decision on. And if we've got an issue of deferred maintenance affecting the conditions of the property, that seems like a germane issue to address. And these facts that I was trying to elicit from the applicant's representative and from the applicant himself, we're going towards that issue. And to me, at this moment, I don't know if I could make any decision if there's other facts out there that we should be taking into consideration with regard to this issue. Then I'd want them in the record and want to look at them. So that's I'm not saying that, and I want to be clear about this, that we are asking the applicant to spend more money, or that we're supposed to arrive at some sort of reasonable amount, or I'm not even saying that maintenance overall is adequate or inadequate. What I'm saying is we seem to lack some figures in this record that the applicant mentioned himself. And so I'd like to have those if possible, because otherwise it seems like we've got a deferred maintenance issue, and if we have that, and if we've got a poor condition of the property, it seems odd to raise the rent on tenants if they've been living with, you know, in an apartment complex that's been suffering from deferred maintenance for years. So that's kind of where I am right now.
Commissioner Niblin.
Thank you. I always have the utmost respect for Commissioner Campbell's perspective on things. Here, though, my sense is that I'm a little less sure that we necessarily need to defer a decision on the basis of kind of information that might be missing around sort of amounts that have been spent. I think the condition of the property is absolutely salient. That's a factor that's called out specifically in the ordinance code. I think the $31,000 figure for the last quarter of 2017 is sort of interesting. I mean, strikes me as an anomaly, probably done in reaction to some specific things that were being talked about at that particular time. I was interested in knowing, frankly, what the trend line was prior to 2017. And unfortunately, that information isn't available. At the end of the day, I think what we have is the current condition of the property. Whatever has been spent to date, notwithstanding, I mean, we've got, frankly, the benefit of a couple of our colleagues who've been able to go and look. We've heard various things from members of the public and from the owners. So I'd be disinclined, frankly, to defer a decision. We've already deferred a decision some significant number of months already, or weeks at least, to get to where we are. I'd want to hopefully, reach some form of a decision tonight. I think it's fair to the owner and, frankly, fair to the public to move forward. Recognizing that, again, some significant concerns have been raised about the condition of the property, and those concerns ought to, frankly, find themselves articulated in some way in terms of, what we think is appropriate by way of a rent adjustment. The only thing I wanted to additionally note in looking at the rent roll, I guess at 57 and thereafter, is, as to new leases entered into, I want to make sure I'm understanding correctly, as to new leases entered into, the property owners were entitled to charge whatever market was, if I'm not misrecalling. And, interestingly, I don't see a single rent on the rent roll, current rent anyway, that actually reflects the market rents, even the adjusted market rents that we were talking about based on the July sort of augmentation supplement. It looks to me like some of the one-bedroom, one-baths are at $2,500 at the high end. And so in my view, that kind of constitutes kind of the higher end of market, just based on, again, looking at our own internal sort of arm's length negotiations that the property owner's been able to sort of land in the context of this specific property. Again, at a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, looks like $2,900 is kind of at the upper end of what's been negotiated, and then at 2.2, $3,100. So I really don't see a basis for a market being any higher than that, given that the property owner is, at least as to new rents, again, able to negotiate what the property owner can get. And so that's an observation. I don't know if that necessarily needs to be where we necessarily land on that, given some other adjustments that might be appropriate. But again, recognize there's a survey, and the survey is adjusted. I think the most competent evidence, in my view, is sort of what has been negotiated for the property in question.
Okay, I'm not seeing any lights, so I'm going to jump in here because I did some work with the numbers that we were provided, and the rent per year currently is $4,022,844. That's what they take in. Now, that's gross. The average monthly maintenance over the full 18 months was $21,215. And that basically worked out to 6.625% of what they were getting, which is not a huge amount to be spending on maintenance, especially when you take into account that they are doing a major piece of maintenance, which is replacing the roofs, which is an every 30-year event. It's something that they should have literally been banking for over the course of owning the property. They should have been putting money aside for a known replacement. It's not that $100,000 on roofs that they've spent so far is almost half of what they're spending on maintenance, which would bring the maintenance down to maintenance for everything else down to around 3%, and that I know isn't sufficient. Especially based on how long the deferred maintenance has been going on. As I said earlier, the back when we approved the condo conversion, and I was there for that too, there literally was a condition that the property, the stucco needed to be done because it was deteriorating, which in allowing moisture in. The windows needed to be replaced, and trim and such needed to be taken care of because it was also in a deteriorating situation. Now that is roughly 11, 12 years ago, and some of those things, most of those things still exist and haven't been addressed. And I'm not comfortable with going anywhere near market rate at this point. I am quite willing to go with a rent increase. I don't think that's out of the question, and I do not think that the property is any kind of slum or anything like that. It is a sound property that needs a lot of attention at this point in time. Mentioning the people not turning the exhaust fans on, I have a strong suggestion. One, that you replace the exhaust fans, and two, that instead of a standard switch, you get the moisture detecting switches that are now current code. So the fans stay on until the moisture's gone. And you do that in all the apartments, you don't have any problem. You're taking care of that issue. And I'm gonna leave it at that and move on to my fellow commissioners. I believe Commissioner Berman was next.
I agree with Commissioner Clifford's statements. I don't think increasing the rent slightly would be unjustified. I don't feel comfortable with market rate. So Commissioner Clifford, you mentioned that previously with the condo agenda item, conversion to condominiums, that you conditioned, so the commission added a condition or a couple conditions for maintenance. So
that was when the condo conversion happened. Now, technically it's happened, but they haven't started selling any of the units. So I don't know how that works out legally. That's none of it, it's not where I'm coming from. But I do know that the problem was recognized 12 years ago, that there was a moisture issue, that the stucco was deteriorating, the windows were deteriorating. And they have not, that has not been addressed yet. They are now dealing with the issue of the roof, which I congratulate and applaud. But other issues around moisture in those buildings have not been addressed yet.
Okay. In understanding that there's different items that we in the commission could kind of condition or request at this time with this agenda item, staff, I'm wondering, I know we could strongly recommend some maintenance improvements. Is it in our ability to condition, given the nature of this agenda item?
Based on the language in the condo conversion ordinance, I do not think that the commission has a discretion to place restrictions dealing with maintenance.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I agree with Commissioner Clifford, and I think you summarized kind of what we saw on the site well. I think there are items that are outside of the tenant's control in regards to the mold, which was my main concern.
Okay. Commissioner Campbell?
So I do agree with Commissioner Neville, and I think you're right. We probably should make a decision tonight, and I'm in agreement with that. So thank you for making that point. It has been a long time, and as far as allowing for maybe a modest increase in the rent, I would be more inclined to do so if I knew that the increased rental income would go towards more maintenance, monthly maintenance. I don't know if there's a way to do that. What I have here in the record is that total rent income went up over the last 2 years by about 50,000, but monthly maintenance expenditures went down. So the record doesn't really reflect that getting more rent results in more maintenance. So without that in the record, I get a little queasy about, well, let's give a modest increase in rent, because I'm like, well, why? And I guess I'm just not clear on the why, other than that there's been a huge increase in rent in the Bay Area costs, but I don't know if that's a reason. Especially with the especially with the condition of the property being a question. So if the commissioners come to a place where there is a modest increase in the rent, I might be willing to go along with that just to get a decision made today. But as it stands right now, I'm less inclined to allow for any rental increase. Maybe in the future, with some record evidence that the monthly maintenance expenditures are going up or trending upward, or things are getting resolved, that could change. But just what I've got in front of me, I guess I'm stuck with why would I vote for that? That's it. Thank you.
Commissioner Big Stick?
Thank you. Before I say anything, a little earlier, as I was asking a question, I conflated Commissioner Campbell's name with Commissioner Clifford's, so I want to apologize for that first. Commissioner Berman, you stated earlier that you, after having reviewed the, as Commissioner Campbell said, questionable conditions, would still support a slight increase. Do you have a number in mind yet what that slight increase might be?
I'm inclined to stick with the 12.5, but I really appreciate Commissioner Campbell's recent conclusion, and I see the packet number, page number 26, the fact that there's no correlation to increased rent and assisting with maintenance costs. But I think this is just an item that we keep coming back to today, and I do understand that we can't give a number, we can't say how much to spend on maintenance, but my biggest inclination to approve a partial or a small rent increase is to hopefully help some of the issues that we did see. And so that's where I'm kind of conflicted. I also do agree that I think it's in everyone's benefit that we come to a conclusion tonight. Yeah, sorry. I'm inclined to be around the 12.5%, mainly because I could see tangibly the numbers. And they kind of, I feel somewhat comfortable with the numbers that I see, given the units that I saw.
Sure, and the fact that two of the residents tonight said 12.5 might actually be a reasonable number, that interested me. But I recall also from the previous meeting, and I believe it's in public record, one of the residents also came and said, well, 12.5 is so much for me personally that I'd have to up and leave California altogether if that's the amount you raised it tonight. And I think in the staff report, one of the options as a possible was dividing it up in two and doing half of that this year and half next year. I'd also be curious, because this question of continuously coming back year after year, this is not a fun process, at least for me personally. I think it's being recommended that it's not necessarily a fun process for the owners of the establishment either. We cannot undo that, but one idea is, and this leads to a question before I say anything else, just to verify publicly, we're able to say, well, you are allowed to raise it this amount every year for X number of years. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Is there an upward limit on how many years we could allow that to go on? I think the gentleman said something about a 10-year something, but I'm not sure how anything works, so.
No, all that is required is planning commission authorization. And the planning commission can structure that however it chooses to do so.
Okay. So here's another option is we could say, well, this percent for so many years, and then this is a conversation we don't necessarily need to have next year, maybe 3 years down the line or 5 years down the line. A landlord who spoke earlier tonight said, well, 5% is in the ballpark of what I've ever been comfortable raising my rate on my tenants. And that's a number that I've heard spoken by other landlords. It's not far off from what my own landlord tends with mine, so that seems to have a basis in how business tends to operate. So perhaps an option could be 5% for 5 years, or some number for X number of years, if not that. So I just wanted to throw that out as another option because while I was intrigued that 12.5 was a number that works for certain tenants, I seem to recall that is not a number that works for all tenants, and being a renter myself, that number does worry me.
And you're done.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Cressy.
Yes, I appreciate all the good questions my fellow commissioners asked tonight, as well as the public testimony. I think just to let everyone know where I stand, given the condition of the units, I cannot in good faith, in conscience, go forward with the increase to market rate, but I'm open to a modest increase, 5 to 7%.
Okay. Commissioner Niblin.
Thank you. Just coming back to sort of the factors, I guess, and sort of the why, because I think that is an important question, why. And the city code does, in fact, indicate that when we get an application like this, we consider 3 factors, and that is essentially the prevailing rents for similar units, and we've sort of had a lot of conversation about that, and the residential rent component of the Bay Area Cost of Living Index. And there's no doubt that that's been a number that's been inflated. And there's going to be a significant delta if you just look in a vacuum in some instances. It doesn't necessarily have to be in this particular instance between what people are taking in sometimes and what they're spending on expenses, just because that's in the nature of the way the index has moved in the last several years, and it does. And then the conditions of the unit, of course, which we've spent some time talking about. I thought Commissioner Big Stick, working in collaboration with others, is hit on something that I think I'd be comfortable with proposing. And I have a lot of us, concern and sympathy for, sort of the potential displacement effects of the environment we're living in right now. And I've spent a lot of time professionally thinking about it. At the same time, spend a lot of time thinking about creating the right incentives for our owners and trying, again, to sort of look at all the equities, recognizing that this is not necessarily driven by equities, but statutory factors. And I really like the idea of perhaps a proposal that we authorize a rent increase of say, 7% over 3 years, 7% a year over a 3-year period, which would certainly not get the property owners everything they're asking for right now, and it would, to an extent, mitigate the impact and give folks some time to think about how to mitigate the impact over some time, and save us all, both the property owners, the community, and us as a commission, and certainly staff, from having to perhaps deal with this kind of year in and year out. So that'd be a motion I would want to make, is that we authorize a rent increase, not to market, but to 7% per year over the course of 3 years.
I'm going to jump in for just a second. And I'm going to, one, the 7% is the number that has been gelling for me, actually. And part of that is because of state legislation. The state legislation is saying, going forward, is looking at 7%. That's the number they have arrived at with a whole lot more resources than we have available to us, and with input from not only renters, but rental organizations. They have looked at both sides of the story and come up with a 7% a year increase.
Yeah, just to be clear, that statute speaks to a 7% increase, but it doesn't say you can't raise it more than 7%. It just creates some potential relocation benefits in connection with all that. So I want to be real clear about what the statute says. It's not a bar on rent increases more than 7%.
And it hasn't passed yet.
That's another important point. Thank you.
Okay.
And just to clarify, it's 7% plus the cost of living.
Plus local inflation, which is I was going into next.
And that number is subject to change.
Well, yeah, right. And all of that is subject to change, but we have to make a decision now. We can't wait for the state legislature to get their stuff done. So the 7% plus the inflation rate for the Bay Area, which I believe is 3%, comes to 10%. And we could comfortably do a 10% increase right now and authorize a 5% increase for the next year, and then a 5% for the year after that. So it gives them a fairly good bump, 10% bump over what they're getting right now, and it gives them another 5% the next year and another 5% the year after that. That's in 3 years' time, they've got a 20% increase.
Could I ask a quick question? Just a clarifying question. That would be 5%. Okay, so 10% this year, that incorporates the inflation index.
Right.
The 5% next year incorporates the inflation? No.
No. Straight 5.
Straight 5.
Straight 5, straight 5.
So in 36 months from now, it's a 20% increase in rent.
Right.
Over 3 years.
Over 3 years.
And, right, the reason I voted for the 12.5% the last time was to make sure that they'd had money to do the repairs and maintenance that I was saying needed to be done. And, I'm not trying to say you got to do something and then not give you an opportunity to have the money. And by giving them 10% now, I don't know how they're going to spend it, and we have no say in what they do with the money they get. But if after 3 years, these buildings are still in the same shape, if I'm still here, I'm not voting for any more rent increases. So I want that out there. I want to know that some money, there's got to be an improvement. I don't care where the money comes from. There has got to be a distinct improvement in the living conditions for the people that are living there, that are paying the rent and supporting the buildings.
I'll be here, Tom. I'll remember.
Mostly with us in a broader sense.
Yeah.
I doubt very much I'll be, but that's 36 months from now before we find out whether conditions are improving.
Well,
At the meantime, it's a 20% rent increase. I guess I'm a little uncomfortable with the size
We
of that.
could possibly schedule another subcommittee, we don't know who will be the members of it at this point, but schedule a subcommittee to go inspect the property after each year. So we've done an inspection now, so there would be 2 more inspections.
That's a good idea. I mean, this is such a painful process. I hate to come back next year, but to wait 36 months to see if conditions improve and at the same time increase their rent by 20% seems like I would accept the pain. and
Well, it's
do
not
this
that the rent's
again?
being increased 20% at the end of the day. It's 10%, 5 plus 5.
Right.
Or 7%, 7%, 7%. And I guess philosophically where I come from is that we're making a decision on the basis of the conditions we know of today. And that's philosophically, I think, what the code contemplates. It's really not assessing on the come. It's really what's the condition now? Now, and my own perspective is that we have adjusted in our own minds below market on the basis of the current conditions.
Okay, and I'm going to go to Commissioner Big Stick first.
And I would absolutely support 10%, 5%, 5% if that's made tonight. Again, I'm a little hesitant just because of that one lady we heard from last time around on the 12.5, and I don't have that input in front of me, but overall, I think it's more than fair. I'd also definitely do the 7% over 3 years, no problem, without that hesitation, but either one works for me fine. I just wanted a point of clarification. Are we saying 10% or market, whichever is less, or 10% period?
I think that's an important nuance. My motion, I guess, would be 10% or 7% was actually what I just felt like 7% in the first year would provide some mitigation for folks, but I would have thought 7% or market, whichever is less. I don't think that market in most instances is going to be relevant in most instances I don't think it's going to be relevant, but I think it would be whichever is the lesser.
That is a motion I will absolutely be able to support.
Okay, Commissioner Campbell?
Stale light, but I'll take the opportunity to say,
Okay.
If 7% flat, 5, I'd be inclined to support.
Okay. Commissioner Berman?
I'm inclined to support the several different percentage proposals as well, just because there were a couple other things that we touched on today, and I just wanted to check in with staff on, similar to my previous question. It's probably a similar answer, but the question of raising rent for people who are 62 as of August 14th, 2014, I think it was mentioned that that's something we can't change. I just wanted to ask for clarification. You can change that. We can. Okay. Well, I guess regardless, if we end up with deciding between 7 or 10, it may be irrelevant, but I wanted to bring that up as well with the commission. If anyone else has anything to say about either tenants with disabilities or senior tenants, impacts of rent increase. Yeah. And just to clarify, you can change it, but it would need to bear a connection to the condition of the units or the other criteria that are available to you. So, for example, if there is some particular hardship that people with disabilities or people over 62 and older face based on the condition of the units, the commission would need to make the findings in order to make the change for those particular groups. Okay. Well, I guess we couldn't quite make the findings today. The commission can. Okay. If the commission would like to discuss why the condition of the units has particular impact to people of those protected groups.
So like if the steps weren't in a good condition, that would have a particular impact potentially on
That's correct.
over 62 and folks with disabilities,
Correct.
for example.
Okay. We could put a pin in that and maybe talk about that for a minute. And then another item is it possible to bring back the annual inspection that was subjected to the property previously? So not a subcommittee, but
an independent or a third-party inspection? Is that within?
That was the County Department of Housing, and they had a specific program that they administered those, and I'm not sure it was annual, I thought it was biannually. But I'm not, what I was referring to was something I knew the Department of Housing, the County Department of Housing was doing with particular units that were on their radar.
I see. Okay. So that's probably not an opportunity.
I don't think so.
No.
Just kind of dovetailing on, we don't want to have to do this again next year, looking at other options. Did anyone have any input on tenants with disabilities or elderly tenants?
Yes.
Commissioner Big Stick?
So initially, I wanted to say that Commissioner Campbell's idea of doing a 755 addresses my concern about that any tenants who 10% might even be prohibitive for. So while I would have to ask for exactly how to make that motion, I would even make that motion, though, as you're proposing it. I support it wholeheartedly. The 62 with disabilities, if we're talking about a 755, for example, that precludes the conversation on 10%, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So that having been said, then it's whether or not we want to recalibrate that, as was mentioned, steps, especially as folk are getting older. That's an issue to talk about, and mold. If we have a very visceral experience before us of walking into a place and having an asthma attack, certainly that also is going to affect those whom are getting older. It's also going to affect any with certain sorts of disabilities. So on the basis of these concerns of condition, absolutely, this is a conversation we can have. I'm not sure, I don't personally have an idea yet, but I have a hunch I'd be willing to support any ideas put forth, what reconfiguring that looks like.
So
Okay, Commissioner Niblin?
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure, and I'm sorry, I think my mind might have been wandering a little bit. So the form of resolution that we have contemplated originally, sort of the notion of going to market with respect to current tenants, up to market, and a cap of, a 10% increase in rent for tenants over the age of 62 on August 14th, 2014. And was the point or the question whether or not we should do something different in light of the 1055 or 777 or whatever?
If we're adjusting the rate of rent for the rest of the tenants, if we should consider a different rent increase adjustment for elderly or...
Thank you. I think it's a really good point. I mean, I think that the resolution as we originally had it contemplated something different for those two populations, sort of the notion of actually up to market for current tenants, and then a 10% increase for those who fit into the age or the disability category, subject to future approval, I take it, of rent increases. So we already had, I think, a contemplated scenario where we were going to have a differential treatment of those two populations. So I don't see any particular reason why we couldn't just stay with the text that we have in the form of resolution, which contemplated a 10% increase. Is there a particular legal reason why we can't do that, given that we were going to treat them differently anyway?
Right, we were going to treat them differently, so I'm following you. But if, depending on which scenario you go with, it's potential that you probably wouldn't want those over the age of 62 to have a larger...
Well, that was I don't see why we couldn't just stay at...
Yeah. So it could be just an irrelevant item if, we're considering no more than 10 anyways, and then I'm wondering, should we consider, if we go with 10 for regular tenants, should we consider 7 for elderly?
Or we could, absolutely. Or another scenario is we go for 10 for both in the first year, and then nothing for thereafter, subject to further action by the commission with respect to folks over the age of 62 or those who are disabled. so that they just get hit with that, then they don't get hit with any subsequent action.
That sounds like a good proposal.
We have a lot of proposals out here.
Well,
And I think we need to focus in and find the proposal that is going to fit an actual motion.
I can make a motion and see what people think.
Okay.
Before you make the motion through the chair, I also I had heard one person mention, and then I don't think I heard it again, the idea of continuing subcommittee inspections, and I just wanted to make sure I understood if the motion was going to include something like that, so that staff here can help prepare language, because that is something unusual and not typical.
Well, it wouldn't have been my motion, so maybe someone will add it. But I think that my motion would be that the Planning Commission find the project is exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act and find the minimum requirements of Pacifica Municipal Code Section 9-4.2455E for rent increase have been met by adopting the resolution in Attachment A. Attachment A subject to some modifications that I'll go into, and incorporates all maps and testimony into the record by reference. I think that the place where I'd be looking is on page 33 of the packet, where it says, "Be it further resolved that the Planning Commission of the City of Pacifica does hereby make the following limitations, and effective on the date of this resolution becoming final, tenants renting units prior to the execution date of this resolution may experience a rent increase in an amount equal to up to 7% of the then current rental rate, or 7% of the rent rate as of the date of this resolution." And then probably a semicolon there, or whatever the appropriate punctuation is. An additional amount equal to 7% of the then current rental rate as of the date 12 months after. The idea is, building on that, the idea is 12 months after that, and then 12 months after that, an additional 7%. And again, sort of words to that effect is what I'm getting at. One of the pieces that I've kind of got sort of fuzzy in my head right now is if one of those 7% isn't taken 12 months thereafter, can they kind of capture it, if they wait a couple of months, so that at the end of the day, or they just skip the second one that I was talking about there, could they do 14%, if they decided not to raise it. I hadn't really thought that through, and I'm not quite sure whether or not, there's any thinking on that point.
I personally would be uncomfortable with that, because then we have the tenants being faced with a very large rent increase all at one time.
So very specifically, 3 increases of up to 7%. One being, as of the adoption of the resolution, 12 months after the adoption of the resolution, and 12 months after that date, which is, in fact, so 24 months after the date of adoption of the resolution. That's my motion. And tenants who are over the age of 62, who have a verified documented disability, will not have their rent increased by more than 7% as of the date of the resolution, and 3% 12 months thereafter.
So just a point of clarification, so I thought it was 10.55, not 10.77.
I did 7.7.
You did 7.7.
I did 7.77.
Yeah.
You did 7.77.
I did 7.777. My own personal view is that I think that's less, it's going to be an impact no matter how we do it, and I acknowledge that. But I think that 7% is less painful than 10% in the first instance.
It's less painful right out the gate, I get that.
That's my motion.
And I would vote for that if we also add a condition that we have follow-up inspections each year to make sure that the maintenance is happening, and that the conditions of the property are improving.
I'll defer to staff on that. I would be willing to amend my motion to include that if that would
So I just want to make sure I understand that the inspection would consist of commissioners in a subcommittee.
Two commissioners in a subcommittee.
And there would not be the need to have a hearing to report back, maybe in writing perhaps, or communications, unless the subcommittee finds that there is a need to do so, because perhaps, conditions have greatly diminished. And otherwise, there wouldn't need to be hearings for these increases that are being approved if the motion is approved. They would just kind of go on. And we can do that kind of annually and get you guys to appoint a subcommittee annually and do that.
That's how I envisioned it, that only if the subcommittee reported that things were getting worse or not improving at all, that then we could call the hearing at that point.
So Chair, my light's on, but just to be clear, I'm not gonna second. I so appreciate what Commissioner Neblin's attempting to do here. I won't be seconding that one. Okay. I'd second something else, but not that one.
Okay. We have Commissioner Kresge, I think is.
I'd be willing to second Commissioner Niblin's motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Do we have any further discussion?
Yes.
Okay. Commissioner Campbell?
No, that wasn't me.
Who was, I'm sorry, Commissioner
No worries.
Big Stick. I thought I heard.
No worries. I don't think I heard, and if you'd be open to the amendment, 7% or market rate, whichever is less.
Thank you. Yeah, that's an amendment I would accept.
In that case, if that amendment is included in this motion, I am ready to vote.
Okay, and I am ready to vote also. We have a motion and a second. Please vote. Okay, that passes 5-1. So you have an approved rent increase, and anybody, let me find that section so I can read it properly. Anyone aggrieved by the action of the Planning Commission has 10 calendar days to appeal a decision in writing to the City Council. Thank you very much. All right, moving on to the next item, Commission Communications. Commissioner Campbell?
Just before any of the staff who prepared the last report leave, I just want to say thank you very much, because that was a great staff report, and it really assisted in the deliberations tonight more than I can express. So thank you. Really appreciate it.
Commissioner Big Stick?
I'll just echo that sentiment. Thank you.
And I'm going to go ahead and echo those also. Thank you so much. I know all the hard work that goes into this. Thank you, staff. Thank you. Okay, moving on to staff communications.
Just a few date reminders. The next meeting is on Tuesday, September 3rd, next regular Planning Commission meeting. That's because of the Labor Day holiday, so just a reminder. The joint study session with City Council is next Monday, the 26th, starting at 5 p.m. The staff report will be published this Wednesday. Also this Wednesday, we are going to update or launch an updated library project website. So providing more educational opportunities to the public about our project. And you'll also start seeing more social media and ads kind of pushing people towards the website to learn more about that project. Another date on the 28th, I didn't write down the time, but there's that ribbon cutting for the San Jose pedestrian overcrossing.
It's 11 a.m.
11 a.m., thank you. And finally, I wanted to let you know that the decision on the annual review of the for the 7-Eleven project was appealed. And so that'll be going to city council most likely, the second meeting in September, so we'll be back to you for a liaison appointment.
Thank you very much for that, staff. We now are at that point in time where we need a motion. Okay, Commissioner Big Stick.
I move to adjourn.
Oh, what am I voting? Okay, and Commissioner Niblin.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Please vote. And that passes unanimously. Good night, folks.
Excellent.
Boy, that was a good meeting.